going to give you a very quick overview, literally 2 slides, about concerns that we've raised and we've taken to City Council, Hamilton County Commission, and it's the spaghetti mess that you'll hear more about from Josh Junker. But when we built I-75 and the 71 connection, we cut off and segregated literally Queensgate, West End, and the Central Business District. So we have a chance to take care of that. The other reason we're doing this in July in the middle of summer is the public comment period is essentially very short. So this is the current website says July to August. We know it's July 5th. So when it's time to act, which we'll talk about at the end, we want to make sure that our voices are heard. So what we're going to do, because it does take a lot of different expertise. So with our panel, we have Josh Junker from Bridge Forward, who will talk about the history of the West End and the environmental injustices. Gina Brock, Vice President from Bridge Forward, will talk about their vision. Devou Good, we have Matt Butler, who will show some animations of what is possible. And then I'll talk about our concerns. So we're going to get sewers in here, we're going to get air toxics, we're going to get water pollution, of course, covered. And then one of the important things is responding to the updated environmental assessment. So fortunately, we have Nathan Alley, our full-time staff, who has quite a bit of experience with NEPA. So he will explain what it is and how we can use it to all build a better bridge and a better community. So I really appreciate all of our guests. So I will turn it over to Josh, who has some history to give us, and Gina. And again, they're both very active. They are creative people and communications expertise, but I've asked everyone to limit themselves to about 10 minutes because we really want the opportunity for you to ask them questions. So I'm not going to give long bios. They're in the thick of it, and Josh, I can advance the slides for you, or you're welcome to come up.
You go ahead and advance it.
Okay.
So what Bridge Forward is about is whether or not we're going to be building Cincinnati better. We look at the past of Cincinnati and we look now. And a lot of the decisions that we made 50 to 60 years ago directly affected our urban fabric, our urban landscape. A vast majority of it was due to the interstate construction of both 75 and the 6th Street Expressway. Both of those accounted, I'd say, for about, I'd say almost under half of the relocation process and the raising of the urban basin of Cincinnati, the western parts. The urban basin is collectively kind of the term known as the entirety of the downtown core of Cincinnati. So that's West End, over the Rhine, Pendleton, downtown, and what is now Queensgate. Those are all what was considered an urban basin back then. We are kind of, Bridge Forward is all about looking at our past, not to, we can't like repeat or resync with the past, but to kind of create a better Cincinnati, and one that looks at what we've done and say, maybe we should do it better. So what I have here is one of the photos that I found through my really kind of a lot of research. So this is from Jackson Hill Park in Mount Auburn, which is where we're at right now in Mount Auburn. It is looking towards Music Hall. You can see in the distance. So you can see a lot of over the Rhine's density, but what surprises me the most is even though there's so much, a lot of like smoke, hole, pollution in the background, you can see just how dense and how much our urban fabric and urban core went all the way west.
Mm-hmm.
There's another angle from the same exact location. This is all taken in 1927, by the way. This is looking straight from Mount Auburn, so you'd be getting about the middle and upper portions of the West End in the background. This was before Union Terminal was built, so you kind of see what it was like before that was built. And you can also see over the Rhine and Mohawk very much intact. And this is one of those pictures that's kind of amazing to look at. This is also around 1925-26. This is looking towards downtown, and in the background you can see the West End beyond downtown. Until around 1924, the Central Trust Tower was the tallest office tower outside of New York City.
Wow.
People don't know that, but I mean, it's kind of a lesser known fact, but it shows just how important we were in the early 20th century, late 19th century. And this is a really good picture that I found. These are all from the National Archives catalog, which I hadn't really perused until about 2 weeks ago. I was like, oh, they have really high quality images. This is kind of what we're talking about. So that's Longworth Hall right at the foreground behind the tanks. That's that plant that still exists today. They built that in the late 1920s. You can see the rail yards and everything right there as they existed. And then just beyond there, that's the Lower West End and where it begins. By the late 1920s, when this was taken, you can tell it's the late 20s because the terminal isn't in there yet. You can see it's a very thriving neighborhood. It's very dense. It reminds you of like what Over the Rhine is like. It goes all the way towards Lower Price Hill. It's only separated by the Mill Creek. And it's approximated around this time, around 71,000 people lived in the West End. This peaked in about 1890, where we had 84,900 residents in the neighborhood of the West End. This is a really cool photo, and it kind of illustrates what had started changing. So this was actually from I think it was a B-36, someone corrected me on Twitter about that, B-36 test run in the early 1950s. Below it, you can see downtown Cincinnati. It kind of looks recognizable, and then you kind of look at City Hall, and everything after City Hall is still kind of intact. There had been some industry that had been starting to develop and everything. And you can see the Laurel Homes and Lincoln Court projects. Those are WPA public housing projects in the late 1930s that were done. They raised about 2,500 housing units from 1937 to 41 in order to build that. They provided public housing. Majority of it was only for white people. They built Lincoln Court exclusively for Black Cincinnatians. But I believe Laurel Homes had about 1,500, Lincoln Court had about 900. And that kind of shows the changing nature of the neighborhood. By this point, it had about, I'd say, 54,000 residents. And this also shows what we're talking about as well. So that's a view, and it kind of shows not only the destruction of our riverfront that we did by building the 3rd Street distributor, which is known as Fort Washington Way, but it also shows how much of a gash we cut in by building the highway west of downtown into the West End. It's amazing looking at the Cincinnati telephone building still exists, which is like a 150-foot structure. Everything west of there is similar to Over the Rhine, same architecture. It was built around the same time period. Most of that was like Italianate architecture of similar style as Over the Rhine. And it was actually, in my opinion, built better because it was built by wealthy Cincinnatians from the 1860s to the 80s. A lot of that was built really well. And then around the turn of the century until around 1920s, the Great Migration began, and slowly the West End began to become the center of Black culture in Cincinnati. What made this interesting is I don't know if I put in a flood picture, I don't think I did, but the 37 flood marked a really key turning point for the West End because half of the neighborhood got flooded from the 37 flood. And unlike all the other neighborhoods that got a lot of relief, were able to rebuild very quickly, didn't have filled in basements of water still 15, 20 years later. The West End, because of redlining practices at the time, wasn't able to repair the masonry that was there, unlike other city neighborhoods that were able to get the access to that funding. So what started was a steady deterioration of the structures there. They were still salvageable by the 50s and 60s, but the city basically it was kind of a two-sucker punch, I guess, where they didn't provide the funding to repair it, and then they got in disrepair and said, yeah, it's gotta be all torn down, which was done explicitly, basically. So, I recently today, read the Charles H. Stanton collection. I haven't even gone through half of it. I like perused through like a third of it. And what I find amazing is, this was outlined in the 1948 master plan, doing this, building the highway like it was, building the spaghetti interchange highway, which was done because they expected a lot of demand from both the interstate and Queensgate businesses coming in. What I find amazing is it took about 9 years from 1951 is when they really started getting going on the process of doing an urban renewal plan. From 1951 to 1960, they had only torn down about, I'd say like less than 500 housing units between that time. Yet, and they still had a lot of time to think it over, to really purposely think about it. Theodore Berry in 1958 said he wanted to really think about it and put a pause on it until we have an actual plan for relocation. By 1960, they said, no, we're going full on ahead with it. And what resulted was a weird series of events, but it was purposeful. The city of Cincinnati, like the interstate caused a lot of the damage, but it was the city of Cincinnati put the final death knell in the neighborhood. Through their urban renewal plan that they created, which you hear statistics that say 6,600 families were displaced. That was a smaller portion west of the highway that did include the highway right of way and was west of Interstate 75. Basically in Queensgate, 6,600 families lived there. But if you include the entire projects, because the federal government said, yeah, these are too big, you can't have these all in one project. If you include the entire total, what happened there, it amounts to about 12 to 15,000 families were displaced from 1956 until 1967, around that time period. And that's what we kind of looked at and said, a lot of the damage was done with the spaghetti and Queensgate. There's opportunities with Queensgate, which was envisioned as an industrial center in the late 50s. They built it and they envisioned 17,000 jobs, and I think now it has like 5,500 jobs are down there. Never met projections. The motorways plan there was built for about 12,000 cars an hour coming out at peak rush hour times. Never comes close to that. I think Guest Street sees that in an entire day on average. And we kind of look at that as an underutilized area of what used to be a neighborhood. The city purposely kind of stepped into that and said, this is what we want to do, and we think it's right. And every single time, every 10 years, there's always a reevaluation process of what are we going to do at Queensgate, what are we going to do? And everyone kind of says the same. It was poorly designed. It never met expectations. It tore down an entire neighborhood that drains an entire, what would probably be now a valuable tax base for the city, all for light scale, suburban scale industrial development that never met the expectations or created the jobs that they were envisioning. So basically Bridgefort's kind of here to see with the history, it's very interesting just kind of looking it over.
I had to change some settings for our Zoom participants, but once again, we'll figure out how to advance the slides.
So these are population statistics for downtown. As you can see, it peaked around 1860, 1870 at around 50, and this is the, as we define it today, downtown area. So the CBD area had 53,000 people in it in 1860. By 1950, this had trickled down to around 12,000. And you can kind of see a trend as you'll see in other inner city neighborhoods, where they have a really peak around the turn of the 20th century. They slowly declined. Downtown declined first because it became a commercial center for Cincinnati and they didn't want as many residents living in it. And you can see the damage from just building Fort Washington Way was really evident, where we are just now approaching what we were in 1960, which was after they had started clearing for the riverfront development and for parts of 75 had started being cleared. We are at 5,800 now. And yeah, the West End, as I said, around 84,000 at the turn of the century, 1900. You can see when the flood hit because it went down to 54,000 by 1940 because a lot of the structures were damaged from that. And the post-war economic boom and baby boom and Great Migration combined with the Appalachian migration all kind of combined for a huge population surge in the urban core of Cincinnati from 1940 to 50, where the West End went from 54,000 back up to 67,000. At that point, the urban basin of Cincinnati had only a 1.5% vacancy rate. It was incredibly hard to find housing. And I think that was part of the reason why the urban renewal plan kind of dragged on, because they tried at least to plan for housing, but from the stuff I saw, they were just relying on private development to fill in the gap, and it never filled in the gap. The West End now as it exists has 6,800 residents in 2020. That was the first increase in population since 1950. And the amount of dwelling units, 21,329 in 1950. That was down to 7,300 by 1970. And as of 2020, that's 3,900 dwelling units in the West End as a whole. 21,000 represents, I'd say, it's like 70% more housing units as a whole compared to what exists now. And I think that's key for what Bridgeport wants to bring forward is we see that there's an acute housing shortage developing in the city of Cincinnati. And we think that if you combine with the space that we reallocate from the highway towards an actual street grid, combined with the opportunities for Queensgate where we need to demand a better Queensgate that's not just an industrial center, it has to have housing. We're not going to create any other opportunities for housing, I think, in our city center that are easily and readily available. We don't have that. So I thought the statistics kind of tell a really good story about the West End as well.
All right, so I think now we're transitioning to Gina.
Yes, and I'm not sure how much background you guys have. I am going to burn through these slides. Let me know if I'm talking too fast or if I'm glossing things over, but let's get going. So this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Literally, we will not get the opportunity to rebuild this while any of us are still alive. This is our chance to do this. It's our chance to get it right. And we feel it's important enough that we have spent a lot of time trying to make sure that this is something that has been brought to the attention of the policymakers of both the county and the city. And we've had extensive conversations with them about trying to make sure that this is something that they understand. So the reason that we're able to do this, the reason we haven't been shut out or not have enough time is because this is what is called a progressive design build. You guys understand most construction consists of you plan it, you bid it, you build it. In this particular case, and especially based on the size of this project, because they're going to start, as my understanding is, with the bridge in the river. So the design of the progressive design build project schedule is meant to accommodate changes, upgrades, everything that needs to happen with conversations with communities. It is specifically designed to allow this to happen. We don't have a hard cutoff date of past this date, nothing can change. That's inaccurate. But this is the first and very large progressive design build ODOT has taken on. So Brian Boland, he's the president, and the one who came up with the idea of what can we do to make the bridge happen, even when it's being stopped by the fact that Kentucky got smart and said, you cannot build a bridge legally from Kenton County to the other, the Ohio side of the river. Like it's in law, you cannot build a bridge there if you toll it. So he came at this at trying to decrease the expense of the project so we could look and see if it would happen. At the time he came up with it, there wasn't the funding there. So he was investigating and putting the thought into it. And he looked at Fort Washington Way and said, we gained 14 acres in Fort Washington Way. We went from like 23 different on-ramps and off-ramps and on-ramps and a whole lot of traffic problems and crashes. We made it safer, we made it faster, we reclaimed land. Why can't we do it again? Let's look at this project and do the same thing. So a small progressive design build project was actually the Martin Luther King Jr. exchange. And it's a good example of what ODOT can do when they work with the communities that they build in. They listened, they talked about what we wanted. They did some things that were a little outside of what would normally, I mean, it has the world's longest off ramp, so you can get up. You know, it's like over a mile long, but they listened and did what was requested and showed that there is a lot of benefit to be gained from working with ODOT and then taking our feedback as a community and doing the things we would like, because we're the ones that live here. We have a little bit of opinion about it. So far, right now with the current IW plan, we do get back 9.5 acres of usable land. It does have on-ramps and off-ramps as requested back in, I believe it started in 2004, 2005, 2006. They do have the connectivity that we asked for then. And they have redesigned overpasses for improved pedestrian and cyclist experience. However, if you're still going to go a half mile on an overpass, no matter how pretty it is, it's not going to be as usable nor attract people as much if you shorten it and make it something that is integrated into a street grid. And that's sort of, you know, any improvements are fantastic, but we think it can be better. So this is what is called concept IW. Okay, I will say ODOT has done a fantastic job of taking this project, being Johnny on the spot with getting the funding, and then making sure that this is something that Cincinnati gets, because my personal opinion is that we do need this project. Now, I'll speak to it from a personal experience. About 20 years ago, I was driving on Brent Spence Bridge, and it was in the middle of a bad winter. I was driving back. I was not on the tailgate, but I was driving back from a dump truck, and the dump truck hit a pothole, kicked up a fist-sized rock, and it went through the windshield of my car. Luckily, this is pre-kids. It wasn't a minivan. It was just me. But I had to drive the entirety of the bridge to get to the point where I could pull over. That's the problem with the bridge that we have, is the safety factor. There's no safety lanes. There's no emergency. Look what happened when we had the bridge shut down for a few days due to a fire. So personally, this is something I think is very needed, because it was 20 years ago that happened to me, and it's just getting worse. So I do appreciate the work ODOT's done, but we can do everything that ODOT needs this bridge to do. The on-ramps, the off-ramps, everything on the Kentucky and Ohio side, our plan can give everything to ODOT that they need to make it work. But we can do it better, in our opinion, for Cincinnati. So I will tell you right now, this is the more cartoonish version. We have had our ideas vetted by an actual traffic engineer in Indiana who's certified in Kentucky and Ohio and well respected in the industry. But we're going with this version, which I fully acknowledge is it's pretty tiny. You know, anytime an engineer gets in there and actually does things, everything gets slightly bigger. So the reclamation of the green here is not going to be quite as clear when we go with the final design. But this color coding makes it a lot easier to understand. So in our improvements, we want to have a Fort Washington Way style connection. We want to make US 50 a little bit safer and saner to make sure that we keep that connectivity, but make it easier to get on the expressway and into downtown. We want to simplify exiting. Instead of doing on and off ramps, we want to reconnect street grid. And as you see in Fort Washington Way, the street grid runs right over top of it, and then you have the benefit of that being a street block instead of on ramps and off ramps everywhere. And one of the other things is that the shorter highway width really makes the attractiveness of using that space for walking, pedestrians, and cyclists much more attractive, because it's not that you're baking in the sun as you go a half mile across an expressway. You're just going down a city grid street. And any land that is reclaimed has street frontage. We can reclaim all the land we want, but unless it's well connected, it's not very usable. I mean, right now we have a lot of green over there. It's not like they built on it, because there's not a lot of ways to get there. It's not very useful. But you reconnect the city grid, and all of a sudden you get all sorts of benefits to reconnecting Queensgate with downtown. And then you get a lot of other ands, and you guys are interested in some of these in particular. For example, big fan of the idea that if you're going to go in there, touch things, then fix what's there. You know, if you're going to dig up an area, while you're there, do the work that needs to be done, particularly for MSD improvements. They are doing this for the Kentucky side. They are getting a stormwater handling system on the Kentucky side that is great for them. It's going to take care of some of the problems that they have, separating and preventing flooding, addressing those sort of issues. We can get that on this side. And now that we have the policymakers of the city and the county on board, those requests are being made. So our goal is just to make sure that we ask and we get. And right now, ODOT seems to be very much in the mode of listening and understanding where we're coming from when we're making these arguments. So, I can take questions now, or I can continue on and break down this picture.
Quick question, can you just flesh out, I shouldn't say flesh out, I should say flesh out what separating means for everybody?
Oh, the concept behind MSD. So as most people here probably know, Cincinnati has a problem with having combined stormwater and sanitary sewers on the regular. When you have too much stormwater, they dump into the sanitary, then you have overflows. We are under federal injunction to fix it, and we have gone to great expense. The South Paramount project that was just done is a good example. There are different things in the Brent Spence corridor that could be improved. And if we're going to go in there to do the work, those things should be addressed while we're there. Because we were under federal injunction to get it done. If we're going to break open the ground over there, let's do it while it's there. You don't break off the drywall from the wall, look at the leaking pipe behind it, and then put the drywall back up. You fix it while you're there.
Do you have a plan for that?
No,
Yeah, okay.
number one, we will get questions at the end, and you're gonna hear a lot more about sewers.
Yes.
So, just sit tight, but when you do have questions, apparently in Zoom, they're not hearing the quieter questions from the audience, so
Okay.
we'll just take the time to repeat them.
Awesome.
Okay?
So I'm going to stop here. And if people want to get into what all of the different colors represent, I have further slides in here, but we can go back to that if people would prefer.
I've got a small question that's not directly important. Do you have any input at this time from Jim Tarbell?
He has been somebody that parts of our organization have spoken to, but I do not know his actual personal opinion. Yeah.
The question was about Jim Tarbell.
Yeah, I believe he's been spoken to, but I don't know what his opinion on it is. We can skip through these, or we can, if we're running out of time, I can go through them real quick.
We're a little over, but you said you can slide through, so.
Let's do this. This is base map. You have the city street grid called out in blue. Next slide. We have the same amount of connectivity for 71 and 75. ODOT's IW plan only has one extra lane heading on 75. We include that extra lane. The rest of everything else is reconnection. So we would like to see a collector distributor that is surface streets. It connects Queensgate, which, as Josh pointed out, the market's kind of spoken on how well people, how much new and innovative businesses have been attracted to that. Not a ton. Right now, it's sort of a location for a lot of trucking companies. This could change with a reconnection to downtown. 71, 75 connections are maintained. A local traffic connection collector distributor is also preserved from the IW program. It just connects slightly differently and it brings a lot of stuff tighter in. Again, with the actual engineering drawings, those do get wider, but not as wide as what IW does. Now, part of the reason is because we take US 50, and instead of doing what IW does, we bring it in and it kind of goes into, they're wanting to call it a tunnel. Some engineers say it can be more of an open, very, vertical overpass system. That is still being decided, but people are taking a look at that. And then US 50 to I-75, we keep that connectivity for all of the west side. And then you have all the connections. Ideally, this is pretty to look at, but even when the engineers get through with it, we still capture vacant land. But the street grid makes it usable.
Great. So what we're going to do is then hear from Matt Butler, who is the president of the Devou Good Foundation, who has invested heavily in this work and also has a vision.
Here, use the mouse, that's okay. Thank you all for having me. Really appreciate it and for all your support. Just a quick background about the Devou Good Foundation. We're a local family foundation and we focus most of our work on transportation. And the reason that we focus on transportation is when we talk to people in neighborhoods about what their needs are, the top two things they consistently say are childcare and transportation. There's a lot of nonprofits focused on childcare, but there's really no one in this region focused on transportation. So we have an active transportation fund that we've deployed, and we've done a number of projects. We did the Clifton Avenue bike lane. We're doing a big road diet in North College Hill. I'm sorry, in College Hill. We've done partnered a lot with DOTE, and this project, I think if you've been in Cincinnati for any number of time, right, this has kind of been talked about off and on for the last 20 years, but really there's not been any forward momentum until COVID hit, and the federal government says we have to stimulate the economy and we have to get all this money at it. But as you know, trying to hire a contractor, whether it's for your house or for your road, it's a long process. They're all very busy. And so the federal money is going to take, looks like, decades to deploy. We have a couple people here with us that have signed on to the coalition. Dr. Ryan Curran is one of them, and he had been researching this, and he actually wrote a letter and approached us as basically a Title VI complaint and said, hey, take a look at this letter, what do you think? And after looking at it, we're like, okay, researching it, yeah, this has merit and it's worked in other localities. So we put together a coalition in November and December, started contacting other nonprofits, faith-based organizations, community councils, all within the I-75 corridor.
But you're saying,
And
so
as
in
you know,
Zoom
this
it's
project
working.
impacts
Not
only
here.
Kentucky and Cincinnati. So we have about 20 entities signed on. Knowing the case, County Commissioner is here. He's the only commissioner on both sides of the river, council member that's had the courage to sign on and say, we need a better project. So we appreciate your support. Jody with our office is also here, and she's been very instrumental in answering questions as well. We've also been running a petition so that folks that are not associated with the grid, but want to make positive change in the community can sign on. So we have, I think, about 700 people that have signed that petition as well on both sides of the river. And so we're kind of running this expand transit, not highways theme, where we're saying cars aren't the future. This project is flawed because actual traffic counts have gone down over the last 10 years in the corridor. So
Yeah.
there really isn't the reason for it. Gina talked about safety on the bridge. KYTC in, I believe, the 80s restriped the bridge and they prioritized speed and driver throughput over safety. So it was 3 lanes. It had breakdown lanes. and they restricted it to 4 lanes, thinking that that would allow more vehicles to pass through. And, since 2014, traffic has actually dropped on the bridge. We've got a graphic to kind of show you that. But projections from ODOT, from OKI have all either remained about the same or gone up. And of course, these are projections that they're saying are 15, 20 years in the future. So, nobody's going to be around to hold them accountable for that. And they just keep doubling down on this. Well, it's been 20 years and now their projections are pretty current from what they said 20 years ago. And they're not anywhere near what they said. They were saying 225,000, 250,000 vehicles a day on the corridor, and we're around like 140,000, and it continues to drop. We also think like jamming this other bridge up against the current bridge is, it's not good aesthetics for the city either. I mean, if everybody wants a nicer bridge, and why don't we just remove the one that's there and put in a new one? We all survived with it being shut down for a couple months, a couple years ago. I think some other data points. I'm not as good as Josh. I can't recite the whole presentation off the top of my head. But the communities that are impacted, the West End communities, the communities in Covington, these populations are largely minority. Latino populations in Covington, African American populations in Cincinnati. They are, does anyone know what percentage of households don't have access to an automobile in Cincinnati?
Like 20 or 22%.
Yeah, 22% exactly. And a lot of these neighborhoods that are adjacent to the bridge, Covington, there's one that's 40% of the households don't have access to an automobile. Cincinnati, the West End, on the inside, what is that called? Between 75 and downtown, that part of the West End. The West End, right?
Yeah.
The east-west end, yes. That one is over 50% of the households don't have access to an automobile. So the people that are going to bear the brunt of this through more air pollution, more sound pollution, more water, stormwater runoff, they won't even actually be able to access it because they don't have an automobile. And where did this plan come from, and why do we have this plan? Well, there's a plan. It's on OKI's website. It was put together over 20 years ago. It's called the North-South Plan. You can Google it, look it up. We've got a link to it as well. And the North-South Plan is thousands of pages long. And one part of it, it talks about expanding the I-75 corridor, adding more lanes. But it also has transit, commuter rail in there as well. So, they've pulled this shovel-ready plan off the shelf because all of a sudden the federal government said, here's all this COVID money. This project is greater than ODOT's budget for the whole year, for the whole state of Ohio. So it's enormous. Austin's building light rail for about 100 million a mile. So, we could have a fully outfitted light rail system for $3.8 billion. And that's actually in this plan, but they're just choosing to ignore it. Talked to John Brezina at DOTE. He said, well, this is a car town. No one's ever told us that they wanted anything but more roads.
And I interrupt briefly. Yes, the cost of maintenance rail is so extremely low compared to roadway. That alone could really make a difference.
Yeah. If you've heard, Cincinnati has a major issue with resurfacing roads, right? We're supposed to resurface 100 miles a year, and we're barely getting 30 miles done because the cost of chipping off the top bit of asphalt and putting it down new has gone up, and the budgets have gone down.
Thank you.
So yeah, absolutely. not only that, but the roads that we have are too wide. And that's another reason that, speeds are high, people are dying.
That probably took it away from the person. Yeah. I was afraid that would happen.
I think my.
So now you guys can finally see it. They've seen it 5 times. So.
This is actually ODOT's video. As you notice, it doesn't really have any trucks on it. It doesn't have pollution. It's
It doesn't have sound.
it doesn't have sound.
You can now.
The cars are happily spaced nicely.
Yes, I think that, a big issue for Covington is the massive size of this. So right now it's a double decker, right? There's one layer off the ground and then another layer on top of that off the ground. They're going to add a third layer on top of that to get to the new bridge. And so Covington's most focal point is going to be this massive, flyover. So I think that I will quickly show you the inflated projections here. So the yellow is the actual counts and the reds are the projections that have been made over the years.
Would you like a chair or?
I'm good, thank you. So I always get the question, well, what happened in 2011, 12, 13, this major dip right down here, right? And through research, the only information that we've been able to gather is this quote from Lori Platt at OKI. And the reason for the reduction in traffic on the Brent Spence basically in 2014 is due to the construction north of the bridge that began in 2011. And if you've been paying attention to that corridor just north of the bridge, it's still under construction, right? We're 12 years later. And so drivers have kind of figured out like, okay, I'm going to avoid that and go either, go a different route or combine trips. And so ODOT, basically did this to themselves. And it's never recovered. So it came back up a little bit, but it's slowly gone down. We took 2020 out because that shows a major drop and it just throws the scale off and it's really not pertinent. But you can see where the red dots are. These are the projections that have been made. And these are ODOT's, OKI's, KYTC's projections. We've gone through all the archives in the Enquirer because basically they started talking about this in around the year 2000. And so that's when they started putting out these kind of inflated projections. So we're at 145, 150,000 and we were supposed to be at about 180,000 plus. And in like 3 years, it's supposed to be at 200,000. So I don't think, anybody, even the traffic engineers, believe any of that will happen. But they're going to do their darn best to do that because they're going to try to expand, add more lanes, which they're hoping to get more people back, right? But this construction is going to be 10 years. And so we don't think that that's necessary. It brings all these negative impacts to the community. What is it in it for Cincinnatians, right? This is more like just, a way for somebody to shave 60 seconds off as they blow through town and go to Detroit or go to Florida. And so we're all going to have to bear, especially these impacted populations. And so we filed the Title VI with the FHWA. They responded, opened up a complaint. They are backed up, I guess, and they said that they will get to it. We asked them if they could pause the project. They said they really don't do that. We provided them some additional data that they had asked for. And we're working with an attorney out of Milwaukee. His name is Dennis Krasinski. He's represented a number of communities with Title VI and NEPA complaints. And so we're just kind of like in a holding pattern right now, waiting for the NEPA environmental assessment to come out, see what the next steps are. But in the meantime, if you get to this link, please take a look at it. Email me if you have any questions. We'll stick around to answer any questions. We're also bringing America Walks to for a conference to Cincinnati in October. America Walks runs Freeway Fighters, and there are about 50 different organizations, mostly grassroots, around the country that are all involved more or less in either trying to right size interstate expansions, trying to cap interstate expansions, or even trying to tear down freeways. And so they're working on gathering those people, putting together the program. They have a steering committee in progress. And so we're excited that that's going to be like the first ever conference. It's going to happen here in Cincinnati in October. So thank you all.
Have you explored beyond the local issue, the question of freight movement by truck? You know, it's not very long ago that we had a pretty good classification yard down here and a lot, you know, most freight was moved by rail and being trucked out to delivery points. And, you know, trucks are the major problem on 65 now.
Yeah, I can say from my background, my wife and I started an e-commerce company in 1999 called Signature Hardware. It's located in Erlanger, and we shipped product. It was a mail order. We bought it direct from the factories overseas and brought it into 400,000 square feet that we had in Erlanger. And we shipped one part at a time out to retail customers that bought online. And the cost to truck freight is so enormous compared to rail. And so we always focused on, you know, getting it from the port via rail, but of course the last mile has to be truck. Because we pretty much, we actually owned a warehouse that had a rail spur to it. It was a paper warehouse at one time, but they've pretty much eliminated all that type of transit, right? There's not many companies that actively use their rail spurs to ship. A lot of times customers want the product a lot quicker, right? Truck could be quick. But yeah, it's you know, I think at the time it was 4 to 5 times more expensive. Our data from looking at this shows that truck traffic is way down in the corridor. I think it's, if I remember right, about roughly half of what it was at its peak in the data about 20 years ago. Why that is, I don't know. Is it circumventing? You know, there's less manufacturing in Cincinnati. Is that the case as well? There are research tools out there that use data from the trucking industry. So truckers have like a GPS that is kind of tied into their all through software. So I guess the bosses can track the truckers and know what they're doing at all times. And they actually sell that data to a third party. So we've looked at trying to figure out like how many of the trucks are actually stopping in Cincinnati, right? Versus how many are just starting somewhere outside and exiting outside, but never stopping. Unfortunately, the data isn't there yet. That technology is not there to actually give a close enough and reasonable enough answer.
I'm assuming TQL might be able to answer that.
Maybe, yeah.
All right, thank you. So Nathan and I are going to continue our part, and all the links will be available. We'll make sure we'll work with our communications team so that if you haven't written or memorized these, you'll have access to their website. So we did not get involved with transportation planning yesterday. Dan Snyder knows we had a wild and scenic committee that fought successfully to stop the wasteful Eastern Corridor Highway project. So that what was initiated, and with issue 7 as well, transit, so the on-demand transit that Metro. So we've been involved in transportation because this is exactly what we want. You okay over there?
Can you move out a little bit so they can see?
Oh, you're worried about me. I'm not worried about me. So to put a dollar figure on it, these are EPA's estimates on what it would cost, and these are older estimates, our combined sanitary, stormwater, and sewer overflows. So as you heard from Gina, the idea is let's attack both problems together. You're going to save money, you're going to save time, you're going to solve both issues faster. So just the timeline, Marilyn Wall is here. If you have a sewer question, she has been in it from the beginning. But it's taken a long time, just to get a plan, okay? But that hasn't stopped. So the nice thing now is you can go to the Metropolitan Sewer District, MSD's website, all those yellow dots, the extent of the problem, those are all combined sewer overflows that you notice this data was from the 4th of July. So we had that big rainstorm the day before. All of these were active, and I've highlighted one that MSD knows is a particular problem in the lower Mill Creek. That's Marilyn's photo of what happens when we have too much stormwater rushing off, is that sewage ends up going directly into the Mill Creek or the Ohio River. And of course, that means then these are just an example of this year's data. Of E. coli levels being exceptionally, not just exceeding, but I've highlighted exceptionally high. So an order of magnitude, as we scientists like to say, that's not good. So right now, this is a map. Bob Park helped identify where these combined sewer overflows are. And so what will happen is it either is going to end up at the Mill Creek plant or overflowing directly when there's too much stormwater. So combining projects makes a lot of sense because this is the target area, what we're calling the land of opportunity, where most of these are, as you saw, are right where they're going to be digging things up and changing things. So and it's been done before. So the blue, or Washington Way, Smale Riverfront, the 2 stadiums, we've done it. So those are now separated. And what happened now is they separated them up north, and then they get recombined down here. Makes no sense, right? So that is, these are maps that we've taken to City Council, Hamilton County. So this is part of our advocacy. We've known since the 90s that what is running off is not clean water. So your rain barrel, right, does a great job. But if it's running off a highway, you've got the brake linings, you've got the tire debris, you've got a mess rushing off, including, these are all Ohio EPA discharge limits. This was measured along the highway. So build more lanes, more traffic, you're going to have a real toxic problem. So stormwater management is more than controlling the flow. And there's technology that we've known for decades on how to solve that by filtering it as it runs off. So you got to catch it, you got to keep it clean. We can do something. Obviously, we are all on the same page. Transportation is about addressing everyone's needs. And so some recent data from the Census Bureau, we are at an inflection point where I'm going to be in the majority. Many of us are going to be in the majority. So my grandkids, unfortunately, will not. So what are we going to do? So what happens when we're living longer and longer lives and we cannot necessarily continue driving? So we need alternatives. We need safe ways to get around. We've known for decades that in Cincinnati, we are in a bowl and that Ohio Valley captures the stuff we send out and our life expectancy is not as good as the rest of the world. We also, most people think of air pollution as asthma, definitely an EJ issue. Who's most affected? It's the minority populations because they live near those highways oftentimes, and they have other socioeconomic factors. So these were some estimates I did on what would just say only 2,000 more trucks. What would that mean? Because trucks are always looking for the fastest route, and right now I see a lot more on 275. So I know they're detouring based on what those the traffic maps are showing them on their cell phones. So just that's disgusting. So just bringing in extra, we don't want that. We want to constrain the project so we can constrain the problem. Because those trucks stay on the roads for decades. When you invest in one, it's not like trading in your car every few years. Expect it to be on the road for 30 years. That's why there's that range. What do we know about diesel? No good. Known carcinogens, enough said, right? But in our own community, this has been studied. So the experts at Children's, and where I got my PhD in environmental health, this was not my work. Patrick Ryan was the lead on the CAP study, but they've been following those who've been exposed and doing a lot. So now we have no idling zones around school. So a lot's been done. Now the big push is for electrifying the buses. But the longer you follow them, the more problems you find. Woo! Okay. Did you do that, Nathan? There. Those touchpads, they hate me. So now we had that hot sunny day. Well, okay, so finally the wildfire smoke blew out, but now we have ozone because the stuff that's coming out of our tailpipe is getting baked. Neither one is very good. This is what I study, it's my favorite, my little baby benzylpyrene. So the complex chemicals, every time you burn something, cigarettes, wood fire, smoke, vehicle exhaust, fossil fuels, nasty, nasty stuff. So cancer, birth defects, and now some fantastic work out of Columbia University. Frederica Pereira has followed, and her team, children who were exposed, backpack monitors on the mom, they know they were exposed to this stuff, and all the way through to adolescence, they're finding behavioral and cognitive problems. So it's not just your lungs, it's also your heart. So look at this. I mean, we have 1 out of 5 men are showing heart disease. Maybe it's we did part of this to ourselves. So these particles, these pollutants not only harm our lungs, they harm your heart, they harm your brain. And you know, we're right in that dark red zone for highest rates. These are maps, and here's the interesting thing. It would have been cherry picking if I got the wildfire smoke back.
Yeah.
This is not from this month. These are the last 4 summers. This was pandemic, July 2024, shut down, right? No one was going anywhere. That tells you how bad our air is. So it's a consistent story every summer. It's not good. So of course there's a better way. We need transportation choices. It's healthier to walk and bike than it is. Transit is an equal opportunity mode of transportation, but not if it's a 2-hour ride each way. So how can you act? So obviously we called you here tonight to hear from some great ideas, but also to talk about what we can do. So Nathan's going to talk a little bit about this, and you're definitely going to hear from us once those public hearings start. So there is, as you heard from Matt Butler, there are laws that work for us, not against us.
That's right. Hi, everybody. I'm Nathan Alley. I'm a Sierra Club employee. Grab your coffee, splash some cold water in your face if you're on the Zoom, because I'm going to talk about some really cool, exciting statutory stuff. This is a 90-minute lecture that I boiled into a 10-minute slide deck that I'm going to try to do in 5 minutes. So I'm going to talk real fast. All right. So what we're going to go through: what is NEPA? Who administers NEPA? When does NEPA apply? How does it work? Where does it go? Why are we talking about it? And what do we do next in hopefully 5 minutes? Okay. So NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, was established in 1970 by act of Congress, and it did primarily 2 different things. First of all, it's right there in its title. It established a national environmental policy for the United States, theoretically in favor of conservation and environmental preservation. Although you'll note in several of the quotations I've got throughout the slide deck, it talks about the human environment. So it's really about the effect on human condition. It's not just animals and plants and clean air, but it's how it affects us as a people. When it comes to using these laws to our advantage, that can be not a bad thing. The second thing that NEPA does, and the reason kind of why I'm talking about it tonight, is it requires all federal agencies to take a hard look whenever they take what's deemed to be a significant major federal action. And of course, that's defined by statute. It's been argued over in case law. Basically, it's big physical infrastructure projects. It's major federal funding decisions. Anything that might rise up to the level of a major decision has to go through this NEPA process at the federal level. And that process requires the agencies to study a certain range of things. We'll get into that in just a second. Really quickly, who administers NEPA? So broadly, the President's Council on Environmental Quality, it's a federal agency. They promulgate regulations, they promulgate guidelines, they review how the different federal agencies interact with the statute. But primarily, NEPA is implemented by all of the various federal agencies. Most, if not all, have their own internal guidelines for how they deal with the statute, but everyone's subject to it, and everyone's a major player in the process when they trigger a NEPA review. A lead agency is defined as the agency responsible for implementing NEPA. They're the ones who are the project proponent. They're going to make the funding decision. In this case, the Federal Highway Administration is the lead federal agency, but they basically delegated their authority to the Ohio Department of Transportation and the Kentucky Transportation Academy. So when we talk about the decision makers for the project, that's basically the triumvirate of decision making. Most of the decisions are going to be made by ODOT and KYTC, and then the Federal Highway Authority will basically stamp it. Local governments, such as the City of Cincinnati, City of Covington, Hamilton County, here in Ohio, can be what we call cooperating or participating agencies, where they're not given any actual decision-making authority, but they do have an elevated seat at the table. They can offer expert information. They can delve into questions that the federal agencies might not know to even ask because they're not local on the ground. Fortunately, both Hamilton County and the City of Cincinnati and the City of Covington are engaged, at least to a degree, in these ways and are working with ODOT and KYTC on the project. So when does NEPA apply? Obviously, in our case, it applies. That's why we're talking about it. Many transportation decision makings at Federal Highway are what we call categorically excluded from NEPA, meaning they fall under a bucket of actions that the federal government has just decided and the courts have agreed NEPA does not apply to. In addition to that, Congress has given a number of statutory exemptions to NEPA to various agencies that then again are not subject to the NEPA process. Neither of those things are true in this case. What the lead agency must do once they're faced with this decision point, we're going to build a project, we're going to make a funding decision. They have to determine whether or not their action is a major federal action that's going to significantly affect the quality, there you go, of the human environment. And of course, I've got major federal actions here. Examples include the bridge project that we're about to talk about. And then there was a funding decision. I was involved in this case almost 20 years ago. It was Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, the state of Maine, the state of California, and actually there's a bunch of cities in the state of California. We sued the Federal Export-Import Bank and the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. These are both federal agencies under the U.S. aid program that give money to corporations working overseas. And our argument was they were funding the construction of fossil fuel power plants in places like China. The pollution that emanated from those fossil fuel power plants was leading to exacerbating global climate change, which in turn led to rising sea levels here in America and other very notable impacts of climate change, which is why we had coastal property owners, people who were growing trees to make maple syrup, but they were seeing their crops affected by climate change. So these organizations were the first people to ever get standing in the court to sue on climate change, and they tied it all back to these funding decisions that were being made in Washington about projects on the ground in China that were then going to have environmental impact back on the people and the human environment in the United States. It's all very Byzantine, but it gives you an example of the breadth of NEPA. NEPA, of course, has been copied by many other countries, international institutions, and a lot of states have what we call mini NEPAs. Unfortunately, Ohio is not one of them. So how does NEPA work? You've determined your lead agency. You've determined that your project is major, that it may have a significant effect on the environment. What you have to do is prepare what's called an environmental assessment. And I think Chris mentioned this phrase earlier. The EA has to include several very important things. Number one, it has to define the purpose and need for the project. Everything is going to flow from here. All of the alternatives that might be proposed, all of the new and great ideas that are put forth by the public, everything's looked at through the lens of this purpose and need statement. So you're going to find that in the environmental documents. It also must include a discussion of alternatives to the proposed action, things that would basically meet that purpose and need, but might have different or fewer adverse environmental impacts. You have to study what those environmental impacts might be. And that not only includes things like the acute air pollution that might emanate from the traffic or the runoff that might go into the river, but what we call cumulative impacts, which is how your project combines with other projects and other things in the area, in the region, that lead to combined impacts. And so stormwater runoff actually and air pollution are both also examples of cumulative impacts. And then, it's a little obscured there, but you must not only look at impacts that you can see today, but anything that might be reasonably foreseeable in the future. Oh, you're fine, it's okay. And then the environmental documents also, the EA must also include a listing of all the people and agencies that have contributed to the studies, the analysis, et cetera, the commenting. So those are the crucial ingredients of the document. Now, here we go. Okay. So once you've completed this assessment, which can take months or even years, you're then faced with a decision point as the lead agency. Either you determine that there will be no significant impacts on the environment, or you can mitigate them to a level below significance, in which case you issue what's called this finding of no significant impact, or a FONSI, my favorite acronym in the entire environmental law world. Or if you determine that there may or will be significant environmental impacts from your project, you have to go on and prepare a full environmental impact statement, which basically does all the things the EA does, but more and longer and in a lot deeper of an analysis. So why am I up here boring you to tears talking about NEPA right now? Back in 2012, the lead agencies for the project, and I should say, when I talk about the project, I don't have it in the title up there, but it's here. We're not just talking about the Brent Spence Bridge, as has been noted. We're talking about the entire corridor. It's like an 8-mile stretch, and it goes well into Kentucky. It goes well into Ohio. It connects with the Western Hills Viaduct. It goes, we're not talking about a bridge. We're talking about a massive regional infrastructure project. Back in 2012, the lead agency prepared an environmental assessment. That environmental assessment, believe it or not, led them to determine that there were going to be no significant environmental impacts from the project. And so they issued a FONSI, a finding of no significant impact. So that was back in 2012. Now that they finally identified funding for the project and think it might move forward, now they have to go back. And because the regulations basically require any NEPA documents that are more than 5 years old to be updated or at least reviewed, now the lead agencies are going back and doing what's called a supplemental environmental assessment. It's not an entirely new environmental assessment. It's basically what's changed, what do we need to add to this, what maybe can we identify as a benefit of the project, et cetera. That basically goes through all the same process, but it relies on those original documents that were created in 2012. We are now expecting the draft supplemental environmental assessment to drop either this month or next. That's on the chart that Chris showed earlier. That's what they've been predicting all along. In my experience, if the agency tells you it's going to be July, August, it's probably going to be August, September, maybe October. These things always drag on. But regardless, this is going to be our opportunity. And I say that collectively, whether you want to find a way to make the project better, whether you want to stop the project, whether you want to better understand the environmental effects of the project, and you don't think maybe that the federal government has done an adequate job of explaining that yet, this is our opportunity to ask those questions and try to get that information. So 15 days at least before that public hearing. Actually, there's going to be 2 public hearings. There's going to be one in Ohio and one in Kentucky. At least 15 days before the hearing, they're going to have to publish this draft supplemental environmental assessment for public review. So that may only give us like 2 weeks to look at this thing and digest it before we're called upon to comment it. in a public comment on it in a public setting. Now, fortunately, we'll get at least 30 days to provide written comments on this draft document. And at that point in time, once that 30-day period is over, they basically look at all the comments, they decide whether or not they need to further amend or add anything. And as is often the case, they say no, and then they issue the final or the final environmental assessment, no longer the draft. And at that point, then they have another 30-day window where they have to wait basically before construction commences. So that's a really important thing to note is they can't break ground on the project as it's defined in the environmental documents until the environmental review process has been finalized. Until that final supplemental environmental assessment has been issued and then 30 days have elapsed. So that's important to keep in mind. If anyone tells you that we're out of time or that things have reached a conclusion, never say it's over until it's over. Yeah, Brian, you have a question?
Sorry,
No, not at all.
just paying attention to your wording. They can't do the groundbreaking until after that point in time. Because you may know politically down here, there's people who would like to have the white card and change.
So this is where, and that's a great question / comment, and I did say it because I've heard various people talk about how they might accelerate the construction timeline. Technically, under NEPA, cannot break ground on the projects until you have completed the legal process, and it's grounds for a challenge. Now, everything's gray in the world, especially in the world of law, and perhaps they find a way to do a local project that's part of the corridor and turn it that way, even though it might even eventually be fun. So that's where, and this is why I'm up here, that's where enterprising watchdogs like ourselves can put levers of power into these very massive processes that often seem like they're grinding on and we can't do anything about it. So Chris mentioned the Eastern Corridor. Sierra Club worked on that for 30 years, perhaps, and ultimately won the day, if you want to call it that. And so this is a process that we can use, again, whatever your goal might be vis-a-vis the project, this is the public's opportunity to interface with the decision-making process. So I think that's my last, well, perfect. So get ready to take action because as soon as that draft environmental assessment drops, we've got 30 days to review it, provide cogent written comments with colorable legal theories if we want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, one thing I didn't talk about, sorry, the very bottom of my slide there. NEPA itself, the statute, National Environmental Quality Act, does not contain a citizen suit provision or a direct mechanism for judicial review. What you do is if you want to challenge one of these projects or decisions legally, you file a lawsuit under the Administrative Procedures Act, which is sort of a blanket statute that gives citizens standing to challenge a lot of things done under federal statutes that don't include specific citizen suit provisions. So there are ways, again, to insert oneself into the process to amplify one's voice if you have specific concerns about environmental impacts, project design, effects on the community, et cetera, et cetera. One thing to note, though, is that all of this is very defined. And when you talk to the agencies, they're gonna try to keep you in that you can only comment on so many things during a separate window of time, and we're only gonna listen to talk about X, Y, and Z. And I mean, that all is true, but these public hearings are not just an opportunity for someone like me to come up and say, your supplemental environmental assessment is not adequate because the impact statement on, no, it's the opportunity for the community to say how this is going to affect you positively, negatively, and how you might make the project better, if at all. So that's the last thing I'm going to say. We, as a Sierra Club, we're going to be here over the next months. We're going to be working on this. We're going to be engaging, and we will be here to answer questions, to help you all get engaged and participate in the process. I'm hoping that we can do another at least short thing once the EA comes out, if folks actually want to do the dirty work of reading it and providing comments. So we'll be here. Christian, may I turn it back over to you for closing?
So
Questions?
we have lots of questions that were typed into chat as well, but go ahead while I call up the chat.
Yeah, I'm wondering, so somebody had talked
Sorry.
about how this is the progressive bill all the way till 2030. Is this one environmental impact thing for the whole process, or if something changes, is there going to be another one?
So, yes, and so if something changes, there could be
Could be.
another document, right? So, if they, put the shovel in the ground and 3 days later find an endangered species that like we've never seen here before, but has clearly been living there for 20 years and no one just knew it, that would be significant new information that could cause them to reopen the environmental documents. And so even when you're reading what they've got in a draft form, that's the kind of thing, that we look for. Like, are there holes? Are there things that I, as someone who goes hiking here or paddling on the river or whatever it might be, know that when their one biologist went out in January to look at riparian vegetation, and of course there was none, it was like, they didn't catch everything in their study. That's the kind of thing that we can add to the project. Great question. Oh, yeah.
Do I correctly understand that the president appoints the participants of NEPA?
So the Council on Environmental Quality is an executive agency under the office of the president. I believe the president does. I mean, I'm sure that she or he does not, get out the notepad, but they have a staffer that does.
Do we see any evidence of the political nature of the situation right now impacting the actual decisions?
Yes, yeah. The Trump administration, his CEQ made a number of changes to the NEPA rules and guidelines, many of which we commented on, and the Biden administration has done its best to roll back a lot of those changes or even advance things further, but I think that's still a work in progress. Yeah.
I think there was another question.
I had the same question that he did.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, my question was just the process of making and submitting comments. Based on your experience, what is the best strategy for individual groups to give in comments, or for a combination coming together with a whole bunch of groups signing off on one input into there to show more support for the same things, or what? Because my experience in working in environmental health, it really depends upon who your target is, and I've never worked with ODOT or anything to know.
That's a really great question, and I've got two different answers. So the question was, what's sort of the most effective way to comment during these types of processes? Is it many individuals? Is it a coalition of organizations? And I'm going to do another and answer, because let's say we want to establish standing for a future lawsuit to challenge the project. Best to get all of the comments in one document so that we can refer back to them and have one coalition or group of individuals or whatever it is able to mount a challenge based on those comments. Because you can only challenge based on things that you've said during this process.
Okay.
If something occurs to you after it's all said and done, no, you can't turn back time that way. And so it's very important if anyone ever thinks that I'm not talking just about this project, but any NEPA process, if you ever think that you're going to need to challenge something, you make all the comments you possibly can, put them in one place. So that's part one to your answer, or to your question. Part two is, from a political lens though, lots of different people making similar heartfelt comments is very effective to change decision makers' minds. So we've got legal strategy, we've got political strategy, and they meet in the middle, so it's both.
And
So maybe
one of the things that, just to elaborate, is we can send out action alerts to all of our members and with talking points, but then we ask you to personalize it, because the technology is so easy. If a politician or an agency gets 100 comments and they say literally the same thing, it's not as credible as if you say, I had a friend who grew up in the West End, or, I'm considering, moving closer to downtown so I don't have as long a commute. So that personalization, these are the follow-ups that we will be sending out to you. So where are the levers that you can address? but also encouraging you to personalize. So
Well, my follow-up question was then, if you do have a consortium of people who really dig into it and create a comprehensive set of comments and inputs that have really substantive or significant things, would there be benefit of having a time frame where you publish that as draft or whatever on your website, or maybe not even draft, and then you get commercial enterprises maybe and industry, all different segments of society to sign on to that, and maybe they can add their own comments?
That's a great idea.
and that's where I think Bridge Forward has been doing a lot of pulling in different partners. I do want to make sure we get to a couple of questions from
Yeah.
chat, but that is, you can go to their website and sign their petition. And the groups, the Union Terminal meeting was awesome, bringing together. There were community council leaders there. Mika Owens was there from council. So you don't win anything without a coalition. That's how we won the Eastern Quarter. Tom Brinkman, who hasn't agreed with us on 99%, saw it was a waste of money and got on board with us. So strange things can happen when you give economic arguments, which, you know, we have to add as well. But one of the comments, so Gina and Matt, they want to know, is there a way to do this? Is it guaranteed we're going to get this other bridge? Or is there a way of doing it without? So the question was for Gina, but I think Matt also has some ideas on that.
So one of the things that surprised me when I very early on was learning about this process, I thought that they were going to replace the Brent Spence Bridge. They are not. This is a companion bridge. They will be doing this with the Brent Spence next to it. Our concentration has been on the approaches on either side, mostly in Ohio, because Covington has been very proactive in getting the kind of project changes that they have asked for. We, on the Ohio side, because we are both Hamilton County and City of Cincinnati, it took us a little bit longer. We had a brand new city council, new mayor. We have a little bit of tension between county and city about what's going on. So our questions about this project are going to be on the Ohio side, and we're just not getting our policymakers on board with this. But the companion bridge is an integral part of this project as it stands now, and there's never been any indication that we would not get a companion bridge with it. Our concentration has been making the project better on either side, and there not being a bridge, I think, is very unlikely, because we're going to have billions of dollars coming into this area. They're not just going to not use it. I mean, President Biden coming to town, that press conference was not for us. It was for everybody else in the country, from Canada down to, you know, Florida. And this is a part of what the difficulty is that ODOT is looking at the larger picture. We're citizens. We live here. We see, you know, what we need, what we want, but there is a larger context that this project fits in, unfortunately, that we probably won't be able to dictate there not be a bridge, or that, you know, the bridge does X, Y, or Z. We're trying to get a better project for everybody in town, but it looks like with the way things are going that we're very much going to get a companion bridge.
So KYTC restriped the bridge in the 80s from 3 lanes in north, 3 lanes south, 4 lanes in each direction. They also changed the classification of the bridge to functionally obsolete, which a lot of people confuse that as dangerous or falling down. But the bridge is structurally sound, and as Gina said, the bridge will remain. People will still be driving across the bridge. Interesting data point about the bridge is it's actually one of the safer places to drive, believe it or not, because the speeds are actually fairly low on the bridge, and higher speeds will create more crashes, which will be more dangerous. We think that there's an opportunity to test restriping it back to 3 lanes, at least going northbound, because KYTC has eliminated this street entrance in Covington as of maybe 6 months ago. So if you're going from fast food restaurants, McDonald's, Burger King, and you're coming north, you're getting on and going northbound. It was, if you recall, it's a real quick jog up. And they closed that ramp. It was dangerous and it actually bottlenecked traffic because of it. And that was actually the fourth lane. So they restriped it again. And they took all they did what they call a Texas turnaround. They brought all the Fifth Street traffic down to Pike Street. They get on there. And they combine the trims. There's really not that much inbound traffic there from Covington. So it doesn't really have that big of an impact. But they restriped that part of the bridge and they still made it 4 lanes. So when you get on at Pike now northbound, you're in your own lane and you don't have to merge. So if you're in the eastern or far right lane, and you just follow that, you end up on 71. And you don't have to merge it on. My son's 16, I'm teaching him how to drive. We got on there and he did great until Reading Road and almost got sideswiped. So we think that's an opportunity to do that, but yeah, basically KYTC just called it functionally obsolete because they removed the breakdown on purpose.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for you. You voiced your issue as a business person, making a decision which is basically an economical decision, influenced in part by time of using a truck versus a rail transportation. I have the distinct impression that the true cost, excess pollution, et cetera, has not really been factored into the cost of operating trucks. And then, if people are going to make an economic decision, I'd like to see them make it on the full price.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's interesting because one of the questions in chat is, can data change anyone's mind? So we know from rhetoric that pathos or emotional appeal are much more important. But yeah, you have to back it up with data. That's the logical part as well. So think about that in terms of what data is most important. Yes, sir.
Well, Matt, I was just going to add, you highlighted the Title VI aspect of our comments to the Federal Highway Administrator. A big part of that also is sort of an outline of a NEPA argument where the ODOT's applications are deficient in a couple different areas, and you talk about the costs of truck transport. We outline an argument about congestion pricing and tolling, and part of that is to capture that externality specifically. So the letter that we have on the Coalition for Transit and Sustainable Development has two prongs to it. There's a Title VI argument, and then there's a draft, not draft, but I'm an amateur, I don't do this stuff a lot, but I just sort of put together at least the start of the NEPA argument against what ODOT has put out there. So, maybe that ends up being a place to start once the documents are available.
Can someone summarize that so that the people online?
I guess basically it would just be that the letter that we submitted to the Federal Highway Administration contains both a Title VI civil rights argument and a NEPA argument. And I just wanted to make sure that was conveyed to the group.
Okay, and if you can share that with us,
Yeah.
we can include that. So I appreciate that. And you sort of showed you the coalition building. I call it a Fonzie scheme, by the way. Because we built something that big and had no significant impact. It's mind-boggling, but yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
But yeah, on data, that's one of the things we're trying to use at Bridge Forward. With the pathos and the emotional, I think a lot of what we used early on was looking at what used to be there and what is there now with Queensgate, which is an incredibly underutilized part of our city that is like just as like a kind of a sore on the face of our city, like right when you're entering. We used both that, and we just came out with an economic impact report that basically said that the 25 acres plan that we have would have an economic impact of $3.4 billion. ODOT's, I believe, is like far lower than that. So we think that using the economic argument for our plan at least data wise is very key in being able to convince a lot of people that, yeah, this is a good idea.
Yes, sir.
It was mentioned that, correct me if I'm off here, but that the bridge corridor, the Brent Spence Bridge corridor is like an 8-mile stretch of, you know, in Ohio and into Kentucky. Was I correct in hearing that?
So the footprint, so we showed it on the sewer map on the Ohio side, and then on the Covington side would extend. So basically 8 miles of impact.
Okay, my question goes into the Western Hill Viaduct, which is within that corridor, and then the impending replacement of that. Is that being figured into all of those?
So that is technically a separate project.
That's what I was trying to figure out. So is Brent Spence going to be built and done, and Western Hills then have negative impacts or redoing things? Like how does this all?
So basically, the Western Hills Viaduct interchange is combined into this project. The interchange they're doing of 75 is what they're building in 2025 or 2028, which is when it's projected for the Western Hills Viaduct to start. That's when they're gonna be going up there at that part of 75 and building the interchange for the design of the new bridge. It doesn't include the viaduct, that's a separate, but the connections directly to the interstate are what included with the Brent Spence Bridge corridor.
We have brought up ideas of how we think, we've discussed ideas that we think could improve this project. They are not part of the progressive design bill. They are part of the conversation on our side, but they're not something that folds into this in terms of the Brent Spence Companion Bridge project.
Okay, but I think one point you might be driving at is that when they're looking at the impacts of this project, we talked about they need to look at the cumulative impacts of everything in the region. And so that is certainly something that has changed since 2012 are the new plans for the Western Hills Viaduct funding for that. So that is a very ripe area to be looking at when the EA comes out.
And just somewhat related, but that's kind of a second question is, did I hear also that the I-75 kind of redo, I'll call it, has been going on, is it 12 years? And then I also heard that they predict the Brent Spence replacement would be 10 years. Does that seem awfully short compared to what we've witnessed?
So it's because they've included this in a larger project. And anytime you start multiple projects marching your way in a direction, it's going to take longer.
Yeah.
This project was specifically set up so that it expands and deals with both sides of the bridges. At some point, Bridge Forward stops having an opinion. If you get far enough north, you get far enough south. We are addressing the Brent Spence thing. We are aware and, you know, keeping in mind the other projects that are part of the 75 very long ongoing process.
Right.
But we have been very clear that we want to identify and concentrate on things that we think that we can make a big impact with this particular project.
I can add to that KYTC is actively planning to continue to go south on 75. So they have funding in place right now this project stops around Beechwood High School. Yeah, in that area, Fort Mitchell. They have funding to go past Buttermilk Pike on exit, and then they also have funding to expand out at the 275 interchange where you split off to go to the airport. So yeah, I mean, I think that the plan is just to continue construction forever, because at this point, who believes them, right?
Good highway engineers do. There was a question in chat about, did you need to elaborate?
Go ahead.
Well, it's actually a Bridge Forward question, because the number of acres to be reclaimed in your plan versus the ODOT plan, and I know those numbers have changed a little bit, so they were just asking if you wanted to compare the two.
So I'm going to talk a little bit here about what's next for the design discussion. And what's happening is that ODOT and KYTC are bringing in what's called the design build team, the design build contractor. They're actually the ones that are gonna design everything, okay? What we're fighting for and really stressing to ODOT is that they could, dictate what that design team does by saying, this is what we expect it to look like. What we want is to open up the discussion to a much broader series of conversations about, what Cincinnati, what Kentucky, what the history is, what we're looking for in the future, reconnection, MSD questions. The design build team, when they're brought on, that's when it really gets real. Because they're the ones that actually are going to be not only designing it, but building it, because they include it all in the project. So when they say IW is X, it does not have to look exactly like that. It doesn't. In a lot of design build progressive design builds, they don't even give them a pre-done design. They say, here's our list of requirements. You can dictate a lot by requiring exactly what you want to see, but they don't even hand over a design until well into the design process after the design build team is brought on. So we're pushing to keep them flexible and open and considering what we want to see, because it's built into the project that they can do that. They may say a lot of things about how, in such and such time it's done. It doesn't have to be. We can push for the stuff we want to see as part of the design build process.
And I will answer the question online. It's around 20 acres plus or minus 5 is how I'd say it's how many acres we capture right now.
Yeah, that was the original point. We won't know what the acreage is until the design build team gets done.
Yeah.
My understanding is what, from an earlier presentation, what ODOT called available land wasn't connected to anything, so it's kind of.
They say it's technically 10, it's actually 9.5 because they don't include the firefighter memorial.
Right.
But like, it's there, but it's not street grade, it's not street frontage, it's just open land that would be very hard to develop compared to what our plan would envision.
Yes.
You have the impression that there has been an effort to assess ongoing maintenance as part of the.
Absolutely. That's a big part of what they look at when they're, not only that, another big portion of what they're looking at when they look at design constraints is how do you build it and allow people to travel through that area while this giant construction site is right next door. So ongoing operations and maintenance, and how do you get it built and not just completely shut 75 out. That's a big part of what they're doing.
Well, I want to just look at the time here. I want to be respectful for time. We started late, I know, but we can continue the conversation afterwards. But I want to take a moment to thank Chris putting this program together, for all our panelists, and for all of you coming tonight. So thank you very much. Get ready to take action. All of us.
Good. All right, so we can answer the last two questions.
Yeah, we should go absolutely.
All right, so I think you're first and then second.
So it's kind of for everyone, but Matt, you brought up the aspect of data and looking at trucking data and things of that nature. Does the team have access to data scientists data? We'll go ahead and analyze that data, build models for projections, and even precisely summarize it for potential use in any of these report outs?
Well, no, I mean, we have data that we're using to back up our decision making based on what ODOT has published. But their projections, and this is not just specific to this project or this corridor. Traffic engineering is basically like fraud science. They basically say, okay, it's about 1% growth a year is what we're going to see. And as you know, Cincinnati's really not growing as a region, especially compared to a lot of some other cities. We're not really losing ground, but we're not really growing that much. So, for them to put these projections out there, nobody ever questions them. And I think that's what we're trying to raise. Is the issue is, well, you're kind of things are coming to fruition now from your projections from 20 years ago. But the but I think it's a challenge. But no, we don't, we've talked to, the one, data science, company, there's a couple of them that give the trucking data. But we pretty much rely on the counts, that ODOT's publishing.
There's a lot of public data sources. Maybe I'll talk to you afterwards about maybe connecting to some data scientists and such that I know that maybe could volunteer and help you get through some of that data.
Be happy to
from
have a conversation.
Were you gonna say induced demand?
No, I'm just gonna kill you.
But that is a problem because
No, but absolutely.
471 is a great example, right, of induced demand because it's filled up now. If you build it, people start looking for the shorter cuts and it just gets congested again.
No, the thing I was gonna say is that, guys, remember that literally the DOT's mandate is to build roads. That's it. They don't think about transit. Stefan Spinoza, the engineer, sat in a meeting and said, oh yeah, we looked at transit. We drew some lines where transit can go on there. But we build highways. So they are they will not do anything beyond that because it's literally not their mandate. The second thing is, it doesn't matter what road you build, it's what you build around the road that determines if it will generate traffic or not. Manhattan has 6 million people on it. And if you suggested we were gonna grow by 6 million people here in Cincinnati, their heads would explode, they wouldn't know what to do. Well, if you build it connected, you build it walkable, and you build it with transit, and then you don't have to worry.
And, OKI is another one. They do their 2030, 2040, 2050. Look at the pie charts because they recommend the spending. And it's ghastly, although it's gotten better for transit and bike and pedestrian. But those are things you always try and provide input in. Yes, sir.
You mentioned induced demand. When I was going through ODOT's application materials, the only air quality analysis they had was, I think, from that initial 2012 FONSI. And the argument that they made was basically that since the corridor is so congested, by expanding capacity, you get better flow of traffic. And so it actually reduces emissions because the flow is more efficient. But there's actually a subsequent legal case in Wisconsin that they admitted that induced demand worsens air quality. So they sort of contradicted themselves.
ODOT's in Ohio.
Huh?
ODOT's in Ohio.
Well, but I mean, it's a federal agency that's providing the environmental approval, and it was the US DOT that made the argument in Wisconsin, and so, they can't really.
There's nothing more irritating when you see them using the funds that are supposed to mitigate air quality and apply them to wider lanes and more lanes, because you're right, they optimize, like at this moment in time, it does reduce congestion, but if they don't count what happens, the orange barrel.
Well, their projections then tie in knots too, because then they say it's going to carry 230,000 cars in 20 years. So it's like, well, if you're going to carry 230,000 cars, you have to, by necessity, create more emissions. So you can't. It's just kind of.
It's pretzel logic.
Yeah.
And those are the things that we're building arguments for.
Just a point for everybody. Have you all read the shocking headlines about how bad the shutdown of, is it 95 is?
No,
Have you all heard about
it's
that?
restored.
Yeah, they fixed
But did you hear about how bad the traffic was?
Not
No.
surprised.
Because the opposite of induced traffic is disappearing traffic. 83 in Chicago, Atlanta, Carmageddon, none of it ever happened. Because human beings are resourceful creatures. We will find better ways around. Again, highways are built on an arterial system where you have a funnel system versus a street grid that gives you connection points. If you have the ability to find other ways, you will. But the highway system forces you in certain behaviors. So.
And honest traffic engineers, and I actually got to speak to one with the Eastern Corridor project, that the best way to avoid congestion is to disperse, to have many, many different ways to get around. And the neighborhood I grew up in, which is very similar to Mount Washington, my husband just came from the Cleveland area, because I never know how to get to your parents' house because you take a different way each time. Ta-da! The roads are really big, but there's a dozen ways to get there. We don't end in popsicle, cul-de-sacs.
I was just in North Carolina, by the way. They have an Interstate 74 here.
Oh, don't, yeah. That was the Eastern Corridor plan. The signs were there to make 73 74, they're gonna extend through Portsmouth and bring 73 down from Detroit. So those are the zombie projects. They're gonna come back because the plans exist, and you know, when you're not looking,
When you're
just
talking
watch it.
about roads, you just look for the next road. to build.
But look at the impact of the interstate highway system on small towns. Virtually wipe them out.
Harlan Sanders nearly lost his business till he got creative, right? Because he was on an old highway.
That guy still owes my grandfather $25.
I'm not there now.
I had a question over here.
I'm sorry.
More of a comment, and a kind of a general question, but people keep using the term, and ODOT is using it and KYTC is using it, that the existing Brent Spence Bridge will be a local route. And when you say local, you think arterial collector local, you're thinking, oh, my neighborhood street, it's so cute. The Woodley Bridge may be local. Maybe Southgate Bridge or Clay Wade, Bailey, but what is a term that we can use that is not the word local because it gives the wrong idea?
Can I answer this?
Yes, please, like I want to all
Like,
use like big different words, you know.
Okay. What they mean is exiting traffic.
Well, I know what they mean, but what word can we say? No, it's not local, it's
Exiting
this.
traffic.
It's exiting traffic.
Or it's.
And
But you could drive through if you wanted to, you could be in that lane and
So-
drive through and you'd reconnect.
Yeah, but it's kind of like that over by GE where they finally took it out, where they skirted the traffic you could.
Oh, yeah.
But that actually is the one, that's the on-ramp from Covington.
Oh, I-
That's the
yeah.
continuous lane.
I know, but I'm saying, when they say local, it gives everybody in the community the wrong.
It sounds
idea.
important. It's double speak. It doesn't mean anything.
Right.
It doesn't
Can
mean.
we just call it, no, it's not local, it's non-express, or like, what's the word that you can?
I have been listening to this argument a lot, many, many months.
Yeah,
I haven't found a good one.
I mean,
Exiting is
You know what?
correctly descriptive, but there is not, as far as I know, a good term, like I know exactly what you're looking
yeah,
for. I haven't found it. If
Okay.
you do, please let me know,
okay,
because it changes the conversation.
oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
What the nickname for that bridge should be is empty.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
the street downtown, 4,500 cars a day. Second Street, 1,500 cars a day. US 50, what's it, 4,000 cars a day? On down traffic from Covington, maybe 12. Empty is what that bridge is gonna be. That's what they should call it.
For those of you who that don't process these numbers in like traffic speed. So Reading Road coming out of downtown is 14,000 cars a day. Total. So we're not talking huge numbers here.
And like the Sixth Street Expressway sees about 35,000 cars a day. Orient Avenue around Cross County Highway sees about 44,000 cars a day. So the expressway has less traffic than an avenue.
We call it the Brent Spence Speedway, you'll be able to go 100 miles an hour on it.
As long as they get off of Riverside Drive for those drag races, I'm happy.
Sally?
I just would like, Chris, as the chair of the transportation committee, could you announce our next meeting in case anybody would like to join? Oh, it's right there. There we go.
Yes, I left that up on the last slide for a reason. So if you are interested, we'll get you, we meet in Zoom, because then we don't have to worry about any traffic, car breakdowns, and we can.
Just strictly Zoom.
For this, we just feel it's a greener option. For this, it's more fun to have people together and be social. But yeah, we do try to reduce our footprint whenever possible.
And no one has thrown their phone at you.
No, happily, I don't know. It's hard to come through the screen. So again, I really want to thank all of you guys that came together for don't come to town, we're gonna stop our feet because that supplemental EA. We have our legal eagle eye looking at it, you folks as well. But it'll definitely be a better project, a much better.
Yeah.
Thank you all in Zoom.